thanks for everyone for coming out tonight. I've heard a few familiar, Doug, familiar friend of ours, mutual friend Willie Turner, back in the day when I worked at MEC. Yeah. So I know your name through Willie. But yeah, so my lines on a map. It's kind of since 1995. I did a trip, kind of across Canada by canoe, and that was my first line, and it kind of got me hooked into this kind of long distance travel lifestyle, not a living lifestyle. And yeah, since then I've just done all these journeys by canoe, ski, rowboat, the Northwest Passage. Yeah, so anything, whatever the best tool for the job is. And of course, for the beautiful British Columbia coast, the best tool for the job is a kayak. And so the journeys I'm talking about today are the ones I did just this past summer in 2023. I did a solo trip about 400 kilometers down the BC coast through the outer islands of the North Coast, and then also this little line around Labrador. So the Labrador trip came about. I was basically asked by J.F. Marlowe and Justine Kurgenvin. You guys have probably heard of those guys, local island paddlers. And they'd been planning this trip for years. It kept falling through and falling through and falling through. People were scared of polar bears and all these sort of things up there. COVID came into it. And they asked me, I said, sure, sounds good, let's do it. And we got a fourth person, Larry Choman, who's a Duncan paddler, a very accomplished paddler himself. And that was the team. So I thought, in order to warm up for this kind of big journey, I needed to do a little trip on the BC coast to start. And I wanted to kind of make it efficient and fast. So I called my summer two coasts, one season. So Labrador coast, BC coast, this trip in May, this trip up here in June and July. So that's when I called Simon. I said, well, I want to just kind of not deal with cars and that sort of thing. Just put a boat on a plane, fly up to Prince Rupert, and then start the journey, and then just paddle south, get to Bella Bella, pack it up, and leave. So kind of avoiding the days of transit you get often in these journeys, either by ferry or by car. I've driven up to Prince Rupert before. Back in 2005, I circumnavigated Haida-Gwaii, and it's a 2-day drive up to Prince Rupert. You get across, you go back 2-day drive back. So this way, it's like an hour or so from Vancouver, and I'm in Prince Rupert. And the journey I did was basically just through the North Coast. So I'd done a trip from Squamish up to Prince Rupert in 2020. So I wanted to do something different. So I kind of want to check out these kind of outer islands. Talk about the BC Marine Trails. I use that map and that resource to kind of research some, because there's not, that's where the information is. There's not much in the West Coast guidebooks and that sort of thing. It's kind of all from the BC Marine Trails map. So starting in Prince Rupert, going south through Porcher, over to Banks, and then down to Campania, Prince Royal, and then down to Price, and eventually Bella Bella was kind of the general route. You can see I did a bit of a dodge out and back. I was kind of pushed back by a gale, but we'll talk about that. And yeah, so kind of just exploring. I always like to do journeys that are new to me, journeys that are kind of, people have been traveling these areas for, millennia. The indigenous people and people have been there. Every inch of the country has been traveled and used when people are hunting and living and subsisting. But for me and for my eyes, these are all fresh and new things. So I always look for something new and different. And so here I am in the condominium in North Vancouver getting ready. The usual explosion of gear, of course. My wife was happy to have a TRAK Kayak set up in there for about a week inside the living room. But yeah, so just kind of everything here just had to pack up into an efficient kind of airline kind of model. And then there it is. So there's the little setup. And so, of course, when you're going point to point, everything has to come with you. Everything is going to go into the kayak with you. You can't leave anything behind. You're not circling back. So the bag, everything had to go into that TRAK Kayak once I got to Prince Rupert, including all my food and everything else. So you kind of made it work. And then eventually, of course, overloaded and maybe a little bit hungover in Prince Rupert. A friend of mine, he's the brewmaster for Wheelhouse Brewing in Prince Rupert. If you've ever been there, Craig Utet. And so I was there the evening before, and then of course stayed out too late, and then had to get everything going the next day. I remember coming to the Rushbrook landing here, like the launch site in the north end of Prince Rupert, and I'm just kind of groggy. I've got to get everything into this kayak. You kind of never really do it until you launch, And then this right away I see just drifting into the parking lot, just this guy on a rickety old bike coming in. He's shirtless, He's got like a life vest wrapped around his arm and twitchy, and I'm going, oh no, this guy's going to come. He's going to come talk to me. He's going to engage. And sure enough, he just does a big circle and comes right towards me. It's like the last thing I want to do after a few hours of sleep, trying to get on the water. And right away he says, I own this marina in the future. This is my marina, but I'm going to let you set up here and take your trip here. But in the future, I said, well, thanks, man. And he said, what are you doing? Where are you going? I said, I'm going on a kayak trip. By yourself? You can't go by yourself. You need a wife. I'll get you a wife. And I go, no, it's a solo trip. And he said, how about some methamphetamine? You want some meth? You want some cocaine? It's like just going on and on and on. I was going, how do I shake this guy? And he said, he took his life jacket off his arm. Here, you need this to be safe. Take my life jacket. So it was like, okay, how do I shake this guy? So eventually I just had to say, listen, man, I'm just trying to get off this trip. You've got to just give me some space here. And then he gets aggressive on me. And I'm going, okay, got to start with a fight right off the bat here just to get this away with. And so he said, hey, I don't want to get violent here, but I'm just trying to get out on the water, This marina is yours in the future, but right now, it's mine. You just got to back off. So eventually he did back off. So that was my opening, that was the guy. He didn't take this picture, otherwise he would have stolen the camera probably, right? So, but yes, another fellow kayaker actually was there, and he took the shot of me as I launched. I eventually got most of that stuff into my kayak more efficiently. Kind of figuring out things a little bit as I went. So leaving Prince Rupert, of course, it is the third busiest port in all of Canada. So you're going out kind of at the base of these huge, freighters and this sort of thing, just kind of cruising along. And it doesn't feel like you're going into a wilderness, but, not too far south of town, you get in this beautiful, amazing wilderness with this kind of, deep indigenous history. Going back, the name of the trip, Laxmoon, you guys may know, means of the sea in the Tsimshian indigenous language. And the people were of the sea, in and of the sea. Their whole life and culture was intertwined with it. And so for 2 weeks, I was going to be of the sea too. And then, so when you go into these areas, so just south of Prince Rupert, I crossed over to Porcher Island and found this beautiful campsite. And before, probably about a dozen of the trees in this kind of little pocket of cedars behind me were all kind of culturally modified. You can see they've taken big cedar strips. And of course, the Tsimshian, the Haida, the cedar is the tree of life. And they would make, baskets for holding, for food, for water. They, of course, would make their big their whaling and war canoes out of them, too. So right away, you're kind of, connected to this kind of, age-old, human culture within this land that you're traveling through. And being on a solo trip, this is, in the past, I hadn't done a lot of solo journeys. Always with a partner. I like the sharing and the interaction between 2 people or 3 people or 4 people on a trip. Small trips, but this time I wanted to kind of experience the solo for more than just a couple of days. At home, I'll do my day trips and I'll paddle by myself, I'll mountain bike myself, but overnight trips I tend to do with other people, but this time I wanted to experience that kind of solo space. And it's busy. It ends up being busy out there by yourself. You guys have probably done these trips, and you realize, you got to write in the journal, you got to get dinner going, you got to find a place for your campsite. And then the time just kind of, you get absorbed into the experience and the movement and the place. And of course, this was a great little site on Porcher, steep beach, short carry, in and out of the bush. So, and just kind of a place that wasn't on the BC Marine Trails, but would be a great site along the way on the south end of Porcher Island. So you find these things along the way that aren't, I'm sure people have camped there before, but they're not necessarily in the regular kind of beaten path. So I worked my way across to Banks Island, and this is Larson Island. Some of you guys may have camped there before, kind of on the north-west tip of Banks Island. And I'd been planning to go on the outer coast of Banks, but there was a 4-day gale moving in. I was hoping by the time I got there that forecast would just disappear and I'd have easy going, but then so I was hoping I could do the outer coast of Banks. So here I am, just kind of, and this is the Hecate here, so about 80 kilometers across the way is Haida Gwaii, straight out to sea. And then you can see here you have these big canoe runs here on Larson Island, about 5 of these, and obviously had been kind of, picked free by human hands. These huge, because it's about a 100-meter intertidal runway at low tide where these rocks were. So laboriously by hands in the previous centuries. I was thinking most likely because it was one of the closest islands to Haida Gwaii that the Haida would have maybe cleared this out for their, when they would cross over the Hecate to this area, maybe to raid the Tsimshian people or to kind of hunt and whale in that area. So right away you're kind of, again, connected to these kind of obviously human human kind of affected areas in nature that kind of reminds you of the people that have been here. And then behind, of course, a beautiful flat area with a big arching cedar tree over the top. But the forecast did not go in my favor. Looked out the next morning, whitecaps popping on the Hecate, gale force winds coming in, building for the next 4 days. But I hadn't done either side of Banks Island. So I said, instead of sitting here for 4 days or 3 days, maybe let's go down the inside. And so that's what I did. And it was kind of definitely popping. Kind of that southwest gale was kind of curling up the channel there. But I remember coming around the east side of Banks. I was just kind of paddling along and something caught my eye, and I see this kind of creature loping along. It's like a coastal wolf. And I kind of just stop in my kayak and kind of the bobbing sea, and then the wolf kind of stops as well, and we kind of have a moment, wolf to wolf, looking at each other. And I'm going south, he's going north, two beings just moving through space and time, going in different directions, and then off we went. So just kind of had a moment and kind of, just recognizing each other's existence for that time. And so working my way down here, it was about 80-kilometer run down the east coast of Banks. And then I was targeting this place called Couriet Bay, which is about 20 kilometers just north of the southern tip of Banks. And I was going to try to tuck in there before the big blow, because it was like a nice and deep in the bay, perfectly tucked away from that gale. And so in here it just seemed like another world, calm, peaceful. But on the other side of Banks, it was kind of blowing up. So this is that low tide at the end of Couriet. I just kept going as deep as I could for the major kind of protection. And then I settled in here below the tarp in the rain, managed to stuff my tent in the woods back there, and just kind of hung out until it all kind of just settled out. So just kind of had a nice, enjoyable time, just feeling snug and cozy in this cove of Banks Island. And a big part of my trip, one of my focal points was Campania. You guys may have camped on the west coast of Campania before. These beautiful, beautiful beaches. Absolutely gorgeous and stunning. I had people tell me about them, so I was going to go there. I was hoping to get some good weather, and so the next day, once the gale subsided, I worked my way down, did the crossing to Campania, and there it was, just beautiful. You can see you still have the dappling of the gale there, but then the wolf tracks over the beach. And it was so gorgeous, I said, you know what? I'm just going to take a day. I usually don't take a day, as I get this kind of like go, go, go mentality when I'm on trip, but the beauty of this place stopped me and made me just hang out there, sit back on this gorgeous coast. And of course, then it got 20, 25 degrees the next day, bluebird. How could I go anywhere, really, right? So I just kind of kicked back here. Gorgeous sunsets with my candle. Always have a candle on trip with you. It's cozy. If you can't get a fire going, you still have that candle for that little bit of warmth. And I have a little video here. Hope it's on there, but it just gives you a little taste of a 2-minute taste of my time on Campania. Now, of course, we have the lovely sunset over the ocean. And I'm feeling pretty manky after a couple of days of rain and gale, and so I'm going to go for a little dip. Yes. The ocean, the lovely ocean. Day 7 and the sun comes out. 51 kilometers I paddled today. Started swelly and then slowly but surely smooth out. And now we're here in the ocean. Perhaps in the first person who's here, it's May the 12th. Yeah. not big kayaking season, but you know, people are missing out. Gorgeous out, yeah. Gorgeous. Robinson Crusoe. I'm gonna live here. Kayak Bill, I'm taking over. Don't worry. All right, so a taste of Campania there. So if you ever have a chance, definitely check it out. Beautiful spot. Yeah, so crossing over Campania to Princess Royal Island the next day. There weren't a lot of campsites in the area there, so you're kind of like ferreting around for something good. And as a single paddler, you can often get in places where a bigger group can't get into. So I found this really surgy kind of boulder beach on Princess Royal and managed to get in there, found a nice little spot for my tent. And then behind it, just protected by these big walls with this beautiful pocket of old growth cedars and Sitka, kind of 200-foot high, amazing trees just kind of crawling out of this valley. And so I was just like a little wood nymph exploring all the little area back there. So it's just such a magical, beautiful place, you know, the North Coast and the BC coast, and especially when you unexpectedly, once you push behind the veil of the beach, the amazing, you know, spectacular beauty that is behind you. And you never know what's back there until you go and check it out. So just beautiful little discoveries along the way. On these kind of, you know, unmarked campsites. Working my way further south, this is Higgins Passage, which is just between Swindle and Price Island. So work my way there, beautiful crystal clear coves, and of course, more amazing trees. This is actually a pretty popular campsite on Price. This amazing kind of, you know, grandmother Sitka that I kind of hung out with and probably talked to for too long. In this beautiful backdrop. And then, of course, underneath you, you know, sea cucumbers, starfish, you know, the colors bursting everywhere in these shallow channels as you kind of skim over it in your kayak. So all part of the experience. You really kind of, as a solo paddler, I find you kind of absorb yourself into the land much more. You're not distracted by anything else, right? It's just your own thoughts and what's around you. And then crossing over towards Lady Douglas Island. I eventually worked my way. I mentioned kind of Kayak Bill in that video, and Kayak Bill, you know, people obviously heard about him for 30 years. For about 10 months of the year, he would live out there in the North Coast, and he has a bunch of established campsites up there on Dallas Island, and this is on Roar Islets, so just enough to squeeze in one tent, you know, in the woods there. Beautiful place to kind of swim with a peekaboo out to the open ocean. And so kind of my last night there before I headed into Bella Bella the next day, kind of doing my best kind of my kayak bill for the evening. And then the final day, 30 kilometers more into Bella Bella. This is on Saunders Island, just right across from Bella Bella. I just kind of camped in there, ferreted into the woods there. And the next day into Bella Bella, break apart the TRAK Kayak, pack it into the bags, hitch a ride with a local to the airport, back in Vancouver an hour later. So a really efficient way to kind of get in and out. So it's kind of like testing out how this kind of, you know, bag in a boat system works. And it's kind of, it kind of streamlines everything in many ways. There's always a set of habits with these kind of boats that you need, but in terms of where it can get you and what you can do with them, it's quite amazing. So I did this trip as kind of, this is like kind of my shakedown, breakdown before I headed over to Labrador, which is a whole nother, so basically going from some of the biggest trees in the world, this rich temperate rainforest, to somewhere that has no trees whatsoever. A very different environment, and with apex predators kind of crawling all around, right? So it's a different kind of ball of wax. So yeah, I was basically contacted by JF and Justine in like, I think it might have been November or something of the previous year to do this trip. I had circumnavigated, had gone from West Vancouver around Vancouver Island and back to West Vancouver on a trip a year or two before, and we had lunch with, I think we had deer sausage and beer on the beach in Ucluelet with JF and Justine. And so they said they remember that time. We kind of got along well. They said, well, how about Frank for this trip? And I said, sure, sounds great. And so as I said, we got Larry on board as well. And the whole mission was basically to do this trip from Kanjik-Salujuk, which is in southern Ungava Bay, around the Quebec side. And up here, this is actually Nunavut, and then you cross into Labrador and all the way down the coast to Nain. So basically there's no communities between there and there. And this trip hadn't been done in about 20 years. It's very difficult to get permits to basically go through Torngat's National Park. The polar bear population here in the Davis Strait subpopulation, which is the area kind of from Labrador up to Baffin. This is the Davis Strait area. There's about 2,500 polar bears in the area, so about 10% of the global population in this one area. So it's very densely populated, and a lot of them, the ice kind of leaves here, kind of goes out, and the bears kind of stay on the ice hunting seals as long as they can. They stay on the ice, they stay on the ice. Then the ice disappears, the bears all hang out, they're all stuck on land here, and they just start roaming around in their kind of walking hibernation. They don't hibernate per se, they kind of walk slowly, but opportunistically if they come upon, four smelly kayakers or something like that, they might take a shot at you. So you have to kind of be careful. So we had to get permits, because usually the Inuit, so there's Inuit, the Inuit of Quebec and Labrador here, they're allowed to hunt and carry guns through the parks in the area and that sort of thing. So anyone who goes into Torngat's National Park since it was established in, I think, 2006, they have to have an Inuit bear guide with a gun with them. So they kind of get out of the southern end of the park, they go in by boat and have someone with a gun. So in order to go in there without a guide with you, you have to kind of prove that you can kind of handle yourself. So we had to go through that process, but we were allowed. And that's why no one had done the trip since Nigel Foster had in 2003, I believe. So that's the last time someone did this particular trip. So here we are boarding the plane. So it's kind of going from a plane to Kuujjuaq. This is from Kuujjuaq to Kanjik-Salujuk. It's a twin otter. There's Larry, Justine, and this guy's posing as JF, but it's actually just a baggage guy. Photobombing the shot here. But this is us getting into Kanjik-Salujuk, and this is what it looks like where we landed. So you can see no trees at all, very barren environment. All our kit here. Our kayaks had just been lying in this field we kind of arrived in the airport. It's just a very small airport, and our kayaks were just lying in this field in the airport. Had been there for 3 months, but no one touched them. And we had a guy in town, Felix, and he's an Inuit guy, and I'd actually run into him in 2012 on a canoe trip I finished. I went through across the Labrador Plateau, dragged a canoe across the Labrador Plateau from Nain and went down the George River. And I remember him and his wife had brought myself and my partner at the time a bowl of caribou stew. And so he remembered that time, and I did a film on that trip called Kituriak, and he remembered the film. And so we kind of connected with him. He became our guy in town who we sent all our stuff to, our gear. And once we got there, he picked us up from the airport. So great to know Felix. So here's JF and I in the back of Felix's truck with the Boreal Designs, the plastic kayaks that JF had organized to get up there. His brother-in-law works for Inuit, Area Inuit Cargo. So we got a good deal on getting all this stuff up there to do the trip. And this is Felix. And so he's actually his mother's Inuit, his father is Quebecois. He speaks English, of course, French, and Inuktitut. And so here he is showing us a polar bear he had actually hunted a few years earlier. But he said after he shot that bear, he would never shoot a polar bear again because he felt so bad. The Inuit are allowed to hunt polar bears. Anyone else would have to have a special, permit for hunting them. But he also was really valuable in this. He gave us bait on where all the little hunting cabins were along the coast, so we could be in there and not worry about polar bears. Otherwise, when we were camping, we had basically someone would always be up. So we'd have a night watch. So say from like 9 to 11, 11 to 1, 1 to 3, 3 to 5. You'd take your 2-hour shifts. You'd be up, ready to kind of scare off a bear, alert anyone else if it came into camp. So it was nice to get a full night's sleep if you can get that cabin information. So Felix also set us up in this abandoned house right on the shore, so we can kind of set our kayaks up, get prepared. So we had our own space. We could sleep in there with our thermarests, and then after that we could set up. And we're right on the shore. You can see Ungava Bay has the highest tides in the world, comparable to the Bay of Fundy, maybe even a bit higher, up to 60-foot tides. So the tides there are incredible. So when the water goes out in some areas, it's like 5 kilometers. So you're not going to do that walk. So you really have to time yourself. Religiously to the tide. So you have to go in. You come in the high tide to leave on the high tide, whatever that timing has to be. So it might be 3 o'clock in the morning. It might be whatever to make it work. So this is us down here, just down from where we were staying. And then once it's filled in, then we could eventually leave. And there's the team. You can see the tide's already filled in behind us here. We're ready to go. First shot of the team, clean and fresh. Day one, as you are. And then off we went. And so this is our first night's camping. And so I remember we were paddling and we saw, there's a cabin. We can probably stay in the cabin. The cabins are generally unlocked in these kind of remote areas of in the Inuit lands and that sort of thing. And so we started going towards the cabin. All of a sudden we're like paddling upstream and the water's coming really quick towards us and rocks are disappearing everywhere. And what was like 2 meters of water becomes 1 meter really quickly. So we had to really double back out to deeper water, and then we had to really rush in to find somewhere so we wouldn't get stuck out in the middle away from land. So we ended up here in this area. You can see we had to kind of scramble over all these rocks to get above the high tide line up here, kind of found a flat area. But we realized it was an area that had been used before by people. You can see here an old tent ring right there. So it would have been used to hold down a skin tent, either seal or caribou skin tent. So we knew, and there was actually a little inukshuk as well. Oftentimes they'll put an inukshuk to let you know that it could be a good place for camping or for kind of reading signs along the land. And so we just by luck happened to run into a place that, yes, it's a good place to camp. So this is a little tarp we'd set up. It was raining a bit. So the bear guard would kind of hang out there. And then this is JF and Justine in there, me and Larry in that tent there. And so this is the second night. You can see this is how the tide goes out so far. So we're way up here on the high rock and the tide. So we have to wait for this all to fill in right up to where the kayaks were before we could leave. But it happens really quickly. That tide moves so quickly there. And it's amazing. You get up around the turn at the top of Ungava Bay and it goes from a 60-foot tide to about a 50-centimeter tide just by going through the passage at the top. So it's quite a radical difference as you go around Labrador. But again, there's the trees there are, they're 2 centimeters or something, but there's still all this life. There's like stone crop, in the land here, phlox. So these kind of colorful little tundra plants kind of, just clinging to life in this very rocky area. You can also see as we're getting up north of Ungava Bay, more ice is starting to come in. We actually delayed our start by about a week because there was a lot of ice lingering around there. JF and Justine, JF's going, we're on the schedule. I said, well, we're just going to be looking at the ice for that first week of that schedule, so let's just go a week later. And we just got up. We timed it pretty perfectly because one thing about all this ice lingering around is they're polar bears. As long as there's ice, they're going to stand that ice. And there's still a big pan of ice in the middle of Ungava Bay, so they cling to the ice. They hunt seals as long as they can. Their primary source of food is seals. And so they kind of hung out, and we actually didn't see any polar bears at all on Ungava Bay. On this actually site, about a month later, there's a group of Inuit who was on the news at the time, and they were actually attacked and a couple of them mauled by a polar bear in this bay. Once the ice had gone out, the bears had come into land, and they started prowling around, and these guys got jumped by a bear. But we were there at a time when they were still out on the ice. And when you're moving with the tides, this kind of rhythm of the tides. Sometimes you have to get up at 3 a.m., but then you get these nice, beautiful, low light kind of times you can get up. It's nice and calm, beautiful colors, amazingly colorful rocks there. The rocks in Labrador and in Ungava Bay, they're up 3.8 billion years old, some of the oldest rocks in the world. So it's amazing, this kind of the age of the place and this scoured landscape has its own kind of stark beauty. And as we had with big tides, of course, all these kind of bits of ice, they get left behind on land. So you have this Justine doing a little gingerbread person on top of the ice up there. So these ice is just kind of left, just randomly all over the place by the retreating tide. So that kind of makes for an interesting landscape. And then as we're moving north towards the tip, you start to see that we're starting to lose a little bit of paddling possibility here. So here's Justine just up there kind of just scouting, where we're going to sneak our way through. We're just trying to get up to McClellan Strait where we can get over to Labrador, and then just picking our way through. And there's Larry, of course. This is kind of your kayak level view of what you're moving through. And the ice is very dynamic. They're not just static there. So the wind and the current are moving these around. So a channel that at one point might be open suddenly closes, or vice versa. And sometimes, as you see later on, we got kind of separated a little bit on occasion. And so we're basically working our way up to this near the north tip now of Labrador. And there's a little town up there called Killinick. It's an abandoned Inuit village, actually in Labrador. But we wanted to go to Killinick because there's really a cool history there. It was abandoned in the 70s. Basically, the government pulled away all resources and they dispersed the Inuit people to southern communities from there. But there also was a freezer there that Felix said we could stay inside, this freezer at this old fish plant. And so we could sleep steadily without having to think about bears or have be on watch. So here's Larry pulling himself across the ice. And here's a little experience of some of that ice working our way to Killinick and some of the landscape there.
See what's happening here?
Oh. It's got to go on my audio here, I think, just. She's not saying anything important anyways, so, yeah. It's more about the visual.
So you do it. Launch it.
So we're basically dragging and then hopping in the kayaks, sliding into these channels, and then working our way through. And again, these things are always opening and closing. There she is.
Yeah. That's the line.
And then I just left her there. Didn't help her or anything. No, I did. I helped her. Yeah. I felt guilty sometimes. I'd be filming and they'd be just struggling with their kayaks and this sort of thing, but I didn't do that much. But you can see there's kind of a bit of a line there. And this kind of line that opened through here then got us around to this last little area of ice around this corner. And this is Killinick. So this is the freezer where we slept in for a night. It's like a former fish plant freezer. And there's JF posing beside the freezer. You see there's some big bears had been there. So you can see probably about a 9-foot bear had been there before, kind of pawing at the freezer. So they're around. And there's JF doing his best bear impression. But this is what the freezer looks like. So we kind of stayed in this. This is like a door we kind of managed to wedge open, and then we could close behind us to sleep safely at night. And this is the other side of the plant. So you see like 55-year-old bags of preserving salt still sitting there from the time it was abandoned. Basically what happened at the time, there was probably like 45 or 50 people left, and the plant had more or less closed. The government couldn't support services there for the people anymore, so they basically said they moved them to places in southern, like southern Nunavik and Nunatsiavut, away from there. So, but everything was just left behind and never kind of touched again. So people still go up here occasionally, but not that often. It's more or less populated by the bears now. But there's our little sleeping arrangement. There were mice in there, by the way. That's where the tent set up, so the mice weren't like running over us at night. But this is like the one space you can kind of safely be locked away from the bears. Got your drying racks, your little kitchen here, and then the sleeping arrangements. And there's JF took a bath. No. And actually, it's funny. The other three, I went swimming several times in the water. The water here is like -1 degree. So it's very cold water. It's just above, I think it's -1.8 is where saltwater freezes. It was like -1 was the water. So very cold. So I went for a few swims along the way on sunny days, but no one else did. They just kind of, lived in their grit for most of the time. So on the way out, so the crux is getting through this narrow passage called McClellan Strait. It's about 25 kilometers that connects you from Quebec side to the Labrador side. And here we are just kind of working our way, looking for like a passage through the ice into McClellan, which is over here. And you can see, this is again that dynamic kind of in and out. I remember a couple of times one of us got left behind, and then it would close in behind, the pans would close in front of you. You'd have to get out, drag over the ice to catch up with the rest of the group. Always looking around for polar bears, of course, but we didn't see any in this area. So we expected this, like, looks like such polar bear perfect area, but not yet. And here's just one more video of just some of the dragging to get to McClellan Strait. So all the ice, because the water through the strait moves at 8 knots back and forth, and so it's pushing this ice back and forth into this constriction. And so we ended up having to get, as we approached the constriction, the ice packed up, and so we had to do a fair bit of walking over these kind of ice areas to kind of get to where we needed to get to. So, and I always get pictures of Justine falling, of course. So. Yeah. But we did eventually, this is McClellan Strait, so I got up high to kind of track the view, but there's the kayaks down there, and you can see it's starting to open up a little bit. So we found actually a nice little channel through here, and here we are going through McClellan Strait. This is Nunavut here, and this is Quebec here, and there, that's Labrador. So you have a territory and 2 provinces all represented in that image. And this is the ice in McClellan Strait. So we got there, but then the tide turned against us, and all this ice was funneling down essentially a river towards us. So this is all going against us. So we basically pulled in to get away from this river of ice that was coming towards us, and we just kind of had a little nap time in the middle of McClellan Strait. JF and Justine could sleep in a hurricane. It's amazing. Like, I'm such a light sleeper, so I kind of stayed up. Everyone else was asleep, and it's like, a bear might come around here. It's possible. I mean, they have come. I know in Nigel Foster's book, I know he said he saw 3 in this one spot. So, but we didn't see any that day. But being in this spot is kind of right in the middle. There's tons of current there, and obviously amazing fishing. And there's probably been settlements there for like thousands of years. And we saw old signs of Dorset and Thule, like kind of early Inuit settlements in there, as well as like an old collapsed cabin. So you can see people in this one spot where you could pull out in the middle of McClellan Strait, you could access and fish, and it was kind of obviously a place that's been used for a long time. So it's kind of neat to kind of stumble upon that wandering around the area. And then once the tide switched, a bit more of an ice jam at the other side of McClellan, but then finally we curled around and got ourselves into Labrador. This is the very beginning of Tongait National Park. I didn't mention actually our trip was called the Tongait Expedition, which means the place of spirits. In Inuit culture, the shamans would often go up to this kind of windswept land to kind of commune with the spirits. And so Tongait is just a derivation of Tongait, which is the original Inuit. So in Tongait Mountains National Park, this is the last cabin that Felix had told us about. So we got here, this is about day 8, end of day 8, kind of a long day to get through McClellan. And then we all kind of decided to take a day off at this one spot, just relaxing. And you can see there's nails all over the board. So there's nail boards in front of the door, usually over the window shutters and over the doors themselves, to kind of prevent the bears from going in and tearing the place apart. And so we took the day, just kind of dried out our gear, did some repairs. We had some leaky hatches, and we found some old caulking in the cabin, but then realized after a couple of days that the caulking had gone off and didn't work. So we just had gooey combing on our back hatches for the rest of the trip. So it was a good attempt, at least. So something to do on a day off. And this is the accommodation. Somehow they'd gotten this boat, which would definitely not have fit in the door, inside the cabin. And so they must have taken a wall out, put this boat in, and then sealed it in so no one would touch their boat. And the JF and they just put a piece of plywood on top of there, made it their bed. Larry and I are on the right on the one bunk in this little cabin, but safe and away from bears, although we hadn't seen any bears yet. We said, are there really bears in Labrador? And then it's like, where are they? And then we see even on the graffiti on the walls here, down here, it's like Paul Jararoos caught his 54th polar bear. So this particular individual had shot about 54 polar bears to this point. The Inuit are free to hunt caribou, polar bear, anything they want. There's no restriction on that. They're still using it for their subsistence living. They eat bear. They use the fur. Again, 54 bears. Like we haven't seen a single. Maybe this guy shot them all. It's like there's no bears left, right? So the next day, we get to. We're about to leave. We're all packed up. It's day 10 now, and we're getting paddling, and all of a sudden Larry goes, "Oh look, a polar bear!" And sure enough, right there, like 200 meters away from where we were camped the last 2 days, this bear pops up over the ridge. So, and you can see if you look closely here, see the tongue. It's licking the air. It's a big black tongue, kind of licking the air, kind of tasting what are these things on the water here, giving us a sniff and a lick. Polar bears, their tongues are black. Their skin is black. Their fur is actually translucent. It looks white, but with the play of the light, it's actually translucent. And so this bear didn't have too much interest, and I was excited. I paddled over towards it, and everyone else was going, what's he doing? What's he doing? But I knew in a kayak with distance it was fine, so I got some nice images of this bear. And then after that, this bear kind of broke the ice for our journey, just turning into Labrador. About 10 minutes later, a walrus popped up right in front of our kayaks. It was too quick to kind of get a shot of it, but a walrus popped up. And then just about an hour later, caribou roaming over the ridge. There's a decent population of caribou there. And then between a couple of islands, we saw these caribou kind of swimming in front of our kayaks. And caribou are amazing. They actually have hollow fiber fur, helps them to float up in the water, webbed hooves, and they swim amazingly quickly in the water. Like it's hard to keep up with them in a kayak. And there they are coming out. And they just kind of prance over the land like it's nothing. For them, it's like a paved path here. It's like the Galloping Goose Trail for them. So yeah. And the amazing thing about polar bears and caribou as well, this is an amazing rocky, loose, harsh, treeless environment. And the bears could be anywhere. And JF, he's a hunter, and he's a really good spotter of animals. And so he'd often see the animals first. And just the day after we saw the first bear, we saw way up on the ridge, JF goes, look up there. And you can see here, there's a bear, and it'll be a bit of a pullback. And so they could be literally anywhere. They're not necessarily just down along the shore looking for like a washed up whale. They'll just sometimes be roaming. But this bear was probably 1,000 feet up, and then in about a minute came from this place down to check us out. But you can see here he is up high. Sorry about the shake. I'm in my kayak trying to get a stable shot of this on Zoom here.
Yeah.
So you'll see how far up he is. Right there. There he is up there. There's a bear. And we're all right here. But then within almost no time, like a minute or two, it caught our scent and came right down and gave us a little swim by. So suddenly the bear was on the shore, and suddenly but it didn't come towards us. It just kind of did a little like sniffing and swimming, and then just swam across the fjord. They are like marine mammals. For them, the land is like the water is like the land. They seamlessly go between the two. And so most of the time our interactions with the polar bears we'd run into were pretty harmless. We're not seals, we're not the regular food, and they wouldn't come towards us. And also the bears, I think at this time of year, in early July, late June, they're not as hungry as the bears you might run into in August, when they've kind of been a bit more of a starvation situation. Not starvation, but just haven't had as much food up to that point. So they kind of do a lot of napping and hanging out and then slow walking. But this bear is another one, just an example of how they really are marine mammals. This one again saw us and then swam. And look how it just kind of moves with the swell and flows from the water into the land here. Boom. Just kind of taking a look back. Who's this guy? What's he doing? Yeah.
Really shooting across.
Yeah, and then look, just cuts out a scene. Perfect actor. Bang. Right there. So yeah, so we'd see, you just never knew where they're going to show up, just kind of going along, and suddenly there'd be a bear, even in the water or on the land, generally close to shore, except for that one that was really high up. So all the bears were kind of very kind of friendly and non-threatening until this one we saw. And so usually it would be like this. I'd see a bear and I'd get excited and I'd paddle up as close as I could to the bear, and Justine would just follow behind me to use me as a human shield, I think. And then so she would film I'd be in the foreground. So this bear, I just started filming it, but then the one thing I do some polar bear guiding in Churchill in the fall. And there's one method they use called aquatic stalking. And aquatic stalking is where, in kind of when the ice starts to break up and there's like leads in the ice, seals will often like bask or rest on the edge of the ice floe. And so what polar bears will do, they'll see it from a distance and they'll work their way, kind of stay as low as possible. So this bear had its head up, kind of just cruised around like the other bear, but then suddenly it did this. It had the ears back and eyes just like this, and just came right towards our kayak. And so when I saw it do the dip, and we were just getting our cameras out, and I was just about to videotape. This is the only videotape I got of it. It's like this quickly, and boom, and you can see it diving here now. And so basically it was looking at us as a couple of seals on ice floes. And so it basically came towards us, dove, and was doing an underwater move to do a pop-up. So we just kind of got the heck out of there. Said, Justine, let's go. They're scrambling with the cameras. So so that was kind of like, okay, they're predatory. You know, we're definitely not the top of the food chain here. So this is actually what I did. Also, I did a little bit of citizen science for the World Wildlife Fund on this trip as well. So they gave me this app. It's called a Smart Mobile app. It's actually on your phone. This is actually the app. This is how it looks. This is the map you get. And this is the data. But you can basically, you have a data set here. You kind of, if you see a polar bear, you basically can geolocate yourself. So it tells you where you saw the polar bear. And then you give how big was the bear, male, female, what was the interaction, what was the deterrence. You can put a little picture, a little audio on kind of like in-time report about the bear who was just swimming by us, and it swam towards us, and then dove, and we paddled away, kind of like the last one. And so you kind of give an audio. So they have this, basically, there's a lot of polar bear science, but most scientists tend to stay in their labs in like Germany, which is the person that we were talking to here. So they don't have a lot of data from the actual place they're studying the bear. So they can get like people like us who are in these remote areas that are, it costs them probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to get scientists up there. We can do it, as we go along, and kind of give them this kind of information about bears that they don't have. So you can see also no bears at all the way up here because of that big ice pan that was out here. The bears are probably hanging out there, so we didn't see them as much. But once we made the turn, no ice at all left here in Labrador Sea. So all the bears had come into land, and we saw them everywhere up and down on the land here. And of course, just the Labrador coast itself, like I said, these kind of 3.8 billion year old rocks, uplifted about 350 to 400 million years ago into the Tongait Mountains, actually younger than the Appalachian Mountains here, but just beautiful, stark, completely vegetation free. Huge walls kind of in the fog, and it was actually a very smoky summer, even though it's kind of weird to have forest fire effect where there's absolutely no trees. So from hundreds of kilometers away in Quebec, there were forest fires burning, and we get these kind of days where the smoke would come. You get smoke in the air and be fogged in everywhere. But just really, it's really hard to capture the scale sometimes. I really had to get as far away as possible and get someone to paddle along the shore to kind of get some scale in terms of the size of the landscape. We did cool, foggy days. As I said, it was very, very cold water, just -1. So the cold water with the exposure definitely was, hard at times. As us just tucking in for a bit of a lunch here. But also, this is like one of those smoky days, that kind of like smoky sun with this amazing landscape. And again, kind of these, remnants of peoples who had been there before us, probably, maybe centuries old kind of tent ring in the middle of a beach that few people go to anymore. And just kind of, you feel very small in this kind of vast, kind of quiet landscape. But the people in more recent history, this is Hebron, which is south of Tongait National Park. This was a Moravian mission that was founded, I think, in 1830. And then once the missionaries came, then Inuit would kind of come around because they would have amenities that they wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And it was a community that was around until the late 50s, until they got moved off because of various, I guess, overcrowding. There's tuberculosis, various things like that. So then they dispersed people from this community to the south. But people are coming back here now, and we actually met people there. Some Inuit folks who were, one of the guys, Joey, was rebuilding his grandfather's cabin. So on the land his grandfather used to live here in the 50s, and he was coming back to rebuild it. This is his girlfriend, Belinda. She's got the Bear Guard gun going on there. So I was, as the people are working, she was just kind of there making sure nothing snuck up on them. And here we are chatting with Belinda. And this is the crew. And there's Joey. So that's his new cabin he's building on his grandfather's patch of land there in Hebron. Brought his crew up. It's about a 6-hour boat ride for those guys to get from Hopedale up to Hebron to rebuild this cabin. But there was a couple of cabins that are already built there, and they are occupying one of them. And we got beer after 23 days. So they had cold Bud Light. Bud Light, not usually a fan, but it tasted like the best beer in the world that day right there. Yeah. So here we are enjoying a little Bud Light. And then, of course, even better, some fresh caribou stew. So Belinda here, she is chopping up some caribou. There's a fair number of caribou in the Torngats, and they'd hunted that the previous year and brought it out. So like some beautiful big dumplings with stew. And here we are hanging out with Joey and Belinda and then the rest of the crew around the table. So kind of an unexpected look. They also had, it's almost like, you see how they had Starlink. So like the Elon Musk thing. So we suddenly had internet after 23 days in the middle of like literally nowhere. They had their Starlink, and they're like, so it's amazing how you can't escape it now sometimes, even when you have that. But of course, if it's there, we shot out a few messages to people we knew, of course, but we also had in-reaches. I was doing, usually on my trips, do like a haiku a day, a little 575, capture a moment or the essence of the day in a little, so I haiku out on my Instagram, so people, my in-reach, so people knew that we were fine and would get a bit of an essence of what we're doing. It's almost better to give less than more, I find, than just too much, but it was there, so we used it, of course, the Starlink. And so the landscape of Labrador is quite amazing. So this kind of feels more like, like the southwestern U.S. Could be like Utah, or could be Arizona. Just a spectacular kind of landscape of mesas, treeless. We camped in this little narrow strip between two bays here. Lots of signs of bears around, some big bear scats, and a bear actually came right up on our camp on this one, but Justine, I think, was on bear watch. She said, "Go away," and just went away. So that bear was pretty friendly to us. And again, you see how small Justine is there compared to these big kind of walls. So this is kind of the landscape you're paddling along on that whole kind of Labrador coast. Really spectacular terrain. Makes you feel very, very small. Waterfalls kind of streaming down from like several thousand feet up. You see very exposed as well, but we had really good conditions, like not too many rough days at all. And here we are looking a little bit worn, not like the first day shot, so a little bit more. JF's showing off his deer sausage that he makes himself. And there's the crew, and then Justine, definitely her hands were getting a little bit ground up, so she was just the cold water, I think, with the wind and the sun exposure over time, and her hands just totally just turned into these big bubbling messes. So she was managing that. Everyone's kind of managing their own situation, either cold feet or tweaks in the shoulders or whatever. It's like any long trip, you just kind of make it work, right? JF had to suffer through oatmeal every day. So in this shot, I took a shot in particular because this is like, day 20 something, and he added a whole bunch of cayenne pepper to kind of change the taste of the oatmeal, just so he can somehow survive that morning's meal, Everyone has their own battle, their own cross to bear, right? So, yeah. So it's always good to be in a cabin like this. So you obviously sleep a little bit better. So there's like one of the other little cabins, and of course in this cabin, JF and I were the apex predators because we took out the mice that lived in the cabin there. So we did a big mice destruction so they wouldn't be crawling over us in our little cocoon here at night. So luckily we had good information on a lot of cabins. Probably out of the 28 days of the trip, we were probably in cabins at least 10 nights, which is pretty good. So, so we had some good nights of sleep with that. And again, as we went down south towards Nain, towards the end of the trip, there's our camp down here. kind of the mountains kind of back off as you get farther south. The Torngats aren't right up on you, but still an amazing kind of stark, landscape to wander around. And the bears were kind of always ever present. This is most of our view of bears, kind of doing their own thing as we're kind of taking pictures of them from a safe distance. And icebergs kind of floating over from the glaciers of Greenland were kind of everywhere. You see this kind of like smoky backdrop. And you didn't want to go too close to the icebergs because big chunks would peel off. It'd be like a thunderclap, boom. You'd hear it from a distance and you'd think, oh, the sky is clear. It sounds like thunder, but it's just a huge piece of ice shearing off of the iceberg. And this is kind of a strange thing, of course, here. There's like a little microclimate towards the south, a place called Woody Cove. Suddenly trees, like out of nowhere, hadn't seen any trees at all of a sudden this one cove, kind of protected, nestled in. There was a cabin there. It's like you're in the southern boreal forest all of a sudden. Temperatures were suddenly getting very warm, 25 degrees. No air conditioning. Here's JF just kind of melting into the couch, full of sweat. Thunderstorms would start raining down with the warmer weather as we approach Nain, getting into the dog days of summer. And here we are entering Nain, finally at the end of the journey. Nain is the capital of Nunatsiavut, which is Inuit Labrador. Kind of the top half of Labrador is Inuit. They have mineral and cultural rights throughout that whole area of Labrador, and this is kind of the seat of their government for the Inuit. And we stayed there with Noah Nogasak, who is one of the few Inuit in Canada who still kayak. Passionate kayaker, builds his own kayaks. He actually took a course with JF and Justine in Ucluelet a few years ago, so they knew him. So we stayed with Noah in his house when we were in town. So great to connect with him. Kayaking culture is still pretty strong in Greenland, but it barely exists in Canada among the Inuit. And he's one of the guys who's actually passionate and is kind of the beacon of light as far as Inuit kayaking goes. So an amazing guy. And if you guys are interested in reading a feature, I write features for Explore magazine, have been for years and years now. So I have a feature out. It's in the current issue of Explore, online or in newsstands, through the land of white bear, which describes in detail some of the stories I talked to you guys tonight about. So those are my journeys from this past summer. And relating to TRAK and my upcoming journey is I'm going to a bit of a different environment and climate again. And I'm going to go on a trip with this crazy fellow right here. So this guy is Mark Skye, wonderful fellow. And for probably about 220 days now, he's been cycling from Squamish on his way to Aconcagua, self-propelled, and he's climbing the highest peak in every state and country he's going through. So he's gone through Washington, Oregon, California, Mexico, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador. He's climbed all the peaks in all these countries so far, all self-propelled by his bike and by his feet. But there's one area called the Darien Gap here, which is this kind of roadless area. And there's about, 500,000 Venezuelans trying to make their way through the migrant trails here. It's very dangerous, very swampy, no real way to get through. So in order to keep his self-propelled thing going, I said, well, Mark, how about if I just fly down with a couple of TRAK kayaks, meet you in Panama City, and we'll just paddle the coast to Cartagena. So he's going to ship his bike to Cartagena, and then we're going to paddle 800 kilometers, and he's going to carry on, and I'll fly back with the TRAK boat. So that is the mission on the TRAK kayaks upcoming. Camping with hammocks, a lot of mangroves in there, so we got a couple of Hennessy hammocks on board for that, a couple of TRAK kayaks, some Werner paddles, and buy some spicy Panamanian food, and off you go, right? Pretty simple. So that is going to be mid-March. I'll be heading off on that journey.